Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I see there are still one or two people joining us, but let's start because it's just 1 minute past 3 o'clock already. If you haven't yet introduced yourself in the chat box, please do so now so that we can know who are all the people in this virtual room. Give us your name, your company, your location. Let's see how widespread this audience is. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Teresa Lee. I am a freelance communications consultant. I am a certified SCMP. I always get those letters wrong. And yeah, I have the wonderful privilege on serving on IABC Africa's board with the responsibility for the Quill Awards. I see we have a few other board members here today. A special welcome to our incoming chair, Yemi Adeyemu, who is joining us from Nigeria. It's good to have you with us, Yemi. Our chairperson, Camilla, is here. Hi, Camilla. Camilla Osborne, it's good to see you. Christine Briet, she's here. Rihanna Sinden, the latest addition to our board. It's good to have you all with us. If I'm missing anyone, please scream at me at the next board meeting. So in terms of today's webinar, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box and we will get to them in the end. If there's time, we will also allow for discussions. And as communicators, I'm quite sure that can be quite lively. But for the sake of the best audible experience for everyone, we will be muting everyone's microphones. In my case, for example, it has happened before that during a webinar, two of my cats decided to settle a dispute behind me. Yeah, so we don't want anybody to be embarrassed the way I was that day. As you may have noticed, we are recording the webinar. So if you want access to the recording afterwards, please just let us know. Okay, in terms of today, test before you tell. I'm one of those people who seem to open my mouth just to change feet. So testing personal and professional messages is an imperative for me. Unfortunately, though, many companies still get it wrong. The idea for this webinar specifically was sparked in January when the Pakistan International Airways told the world that they're renewing their flights to Paris, France. And then they proceeded to post this graphic that'll come up on your screen on the 10th of January. It shows a passenger jet flying towards the Eiffel Tower alongside the tagline, "We're coming today." Although the graphic was intended to promote the new twice-weekly flights between Islamabad and Paris, social media users quickly drew parallels with the 2001 terror attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City, the day we all now know as 9/11. "Fire your marketing manager," someone wrote on social media. And another person asked, "Who thought this ad was a good idea?" And yet another comment, "Did the airline management not vet this? Did the idiot who designed this graphic not see a PIA plane heading for the Eiffel Tower, one of Europe's iconic landmarks?" So that led us to today, where we will be talking about message testing. And we are in the wonderful position to have Wendy van Eyck to lead this discussion and share her experience with us. She is an experienced communication strategist and consultant, and she has more than 15 years of message testing and campaign development under her belt. She started her career in live TV productions, so she knows how to think on her feet. And she's worked across multiple sectors as a marketing manager, where she's helped organizations refine their messaging to drive impact. She has led global campaigns for clients in various sectors. And projects such as Project Last Mile and WaterAid have used her expertise in behavioral change communications to test, adapt, and optimize messaging for diverse audiences. Wendy holds a master's degree in development practices from the University of Pretoria, and she combines her academic qualifications with practical experience to create evidence-based, culturally relevant communication strategies. She's passionate about helping organizations connect with their audiences in meaningful ways. Outside of work, she enjoys running long distances and working out, as she believes that both fitness and communication require persistence, consistency, and pushing through boundaries. So let me stop talking so that we can listen to Wendy. Wendy, thank you very much. We are so looking forward to hearing from you on this wonderful topic.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's great to be here. So I started out in media 20 years ago, and my first job straight out of varsity was as a scriptwriter. And honestly, it paid less than my part-time au pair gig that I had at the time. But it was under one of South Africa's top creative directors. So I thought this is a great opportunity. And after a few months, I was promoted to live TV producer. Just sharing my screen, sorry. And I still remember co-producing a weeknight show with Roxy Berger and Salai Tabakhali. It was a live show. There were lots of kids' TV presenters. And I was very green. This was my first experience in TV. But the people that I was working with, they were very experienced. So I lent on them a lot with everything that I did. And most days we went live in the studio. But then one day we managed to book Kelly Clarkson for an interview when she came to South Africa. And we were super excited, but the interview had to be pre-recorded on location. So this was new for us. It wasn't live in studio, which was what we were used to. So we arrived early, ready for the big day. We walked over to get our equipment. And when we arrived, our director walked up to us and said, the equipment isn't booked. And we stared at each other and went like, that can't be. But it turns out there was no equipment. We hadn't booked it and there was nothing available for the day. So we scrambled and we called people and we managed to get some equipment, but we had to return it by 11. And now, as we were driving to the shoot, our director was really annoyed and he got really furious with us when one of us said, oh, but we assumed someone else had booked the equipment. And his words stuck with me that he responded to us when he said, assumptions are the mother of all mess ups. You can imagine that he used much more colorful language than I've shared here. But that brings us to what we're talking about today, which is how, sorry, of my screen share, let me just get it right. Let me take a minute to get it working. Okay, that should be working now. So, and this is where we're starting today, is with assumptions. So assumptions shape the way we communicate, they shape how we share information, and sometimes how we ruin it. So some of you, if you joined at 3 o'clock, for the minute while we were waiting for other people to join, we asked you to write down how you'd make toast. And so you probably thought, like, this is a little bit weird. Why are they asking us about how you make toast? And I was reading through some of your answers, and I saw that some of you said things like, take the bread and put it in the toaster. Now I've got a whole loaf here because some of you lacked an instruction to say you need to cut the toast or the toast needs to be sliced beforehand. And obviously trying to fit this whole loaf of bread in the toaster isn't going to work. And so this little example just shows how in communication, when we make assumptions, that things don't always communicate the message that we wanted. And the audience that we're speaking to, they might not share our assumptions. And that can lead to confusion, misinterpretation, or worse, damage to your reputation, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So let's look at how some assumptions have led to communication disasters in the last few years. So in 2017, Pepsi released a commercial featuring Kendall Jenner in a protest setting with the tagline, "Live for Now." Some of you might remember this. And the ad co-opted imagery of real-world protests, including Black Lives Matter, And they were trying to sell Pepsi, obviously. In the ad, Jenna hands the police officer Pepsi, which miraculously resolves all tension and brings peace. The backlash was swift. People saw it as a trivialization of real social struggles, particularly police brutality. And what had gone wrong there is Pepsi assumed that linking their product to a message of unity would resonate with younger audiences, but instead it came across as tone deaf and exploitative. Then most of you will probably remember this. This was in 2018. H&M released an ad featuring a black child wearing a hoodie with the slogan, "Coolest monkey in the jungle." It was part of a jungle-themed line, but the association with a black child and the term monkey sparked outrage globally, and especially in South Africa. You might remember some of the protests around it. H&M claimed it wasn't intentional, but the damage was done. The ad reflected an assumption that no one would see the racial connotation, likely because the team working on it themselves hadn't seen the racial connotation. But as we know, assumptions like this can be harmful, especially when they overlook cultural sensitivities. Another campaign you might remember was in 2020. Clicks posted a Tresemme ad that labeled Black woman's hair as dry and damaged and frizzy and dull, and a white woman's hair was labeled as normal. And this assumption about beauty standards not only lacked cultural awareness, but it also inadvertently reinforced harmful stereotypes. Then incoming IABC chairperson, Yemi, shared this ad from Nigeria with me. And you'll be hearing from him at the end of the webinar. So in April 2022, Sterling Bank Nigeria made headlines when they launched an Easter ad that drew quite a bit of attention, but for all the wrong reasons. So the ad made an unusual comparison between Jesus' resurrection and the rising of agar bread. I hope I said that right. Unfortunately, this choice of words and imagery sparked considerable outrage, as many felt it was a disrespectful nod to the Christian faith. The bank promptly withdrew the advertisement. I've included the withdrawal post that they did later, and expressed their sincere apologies. And the incident serves as a reminder of the importance of not assuming things around religion or culture in marketing. Okay, then the last one I'm going to look at is the Pakistan International Airlines ad that Teresa already covered. So people immediately called the airline out, questioning if this campaign was some sort of threat. And what's interesting to me about this is actually the idea that sometimes our stereotypes and assumptions that we have about people aren't the same assumptions they hold about themselves. So the Pakistani people, when they were making this ad, obviously don't hold the same assumptions about themselves as being terrorists or guilty of 9/11 as the people who saw this ad did. So there's something interesting just about how sometimes our own assumptions, we don't see them the same way other people would see them. So Pakistan International Airways responded with surprise to this. They said it was just meant to celebrate the resumption of flights to Paris. And the Pakistani Prime Minister ordered an investigation into how this ad got approved. And it shows how crucial it is to test our messaging before it goes out into the world. So like Teresa said, you might be thinking, how do these mistakes happen? So I came across this quote recently by Zanele Njape, and she said, there are a number of things happening in a scene at any given time, and your perspective is based on how many of those you are aware of. So let me put this another way. Imagine you're at a sporting event with a bunch of things happening all at once. If you're an athlete, you only see the track in front of you that you're about to race. If you're a photographer on the sidelines, you're looking at the athlete and the shot that you're about to get. But if you're in the stands, you've got a wide view of all these things, but you can't see the details. You can't see the sweat dripping on a person's leg or how they might have their shoelace untied. So your decisions or thoughts about a situation are based on what you can see. That's your perspective. If you could shift your viewpoint and see more, maybe go down to the track, or the athlete could come up and see what was happening. You'd have a better understanding of everything that was happening, and you'd be less likely to make decisions based on the limited information that you have. So when you're working on messaging or reflecting on your assumptions, ask yourself, if I challenge my own view, what would I be asking? Or ask yourself, what am I missing? The more you see, the better the decisions you'll make, and the more audience will connect with what you're sharing. So how do you check that you've looked at something from multiple perspectives so you can avoid these mistakes? So it's simple, and it's also not simple to test things. And we obviously can't cover and testing the message at, and testing the message at each step. So this process of co-creation, where you test as you create versus just creating and then testing, allows you to have multiple perspectives as you go about creating the content and helps you see what you might be missing. So co-creation isn't a one-off event, it's a continuous loop, and I'm going to show you a practical case study of how this was done, as well as the steps to do it. And you consistently engage the target audience and stakeholders from the initial stages of the campaign to the final messaging. You involve the people who will engage with it in shaping it, and you don't assume that you know what works for them. You ask and you listen. So let's take a deeper look at how co-creation worked in South Africa to develop a campaign and materials for a youth health pilot. So my agency, Believe Content Agency, was contracted by Project Last Mile, who were funded by USAID to pilot this for the Western Cape Government's Department of Health. So IABC chairperson, who many of you know and is on the call, Camilla, was the lead for Project Last Mile on this. At the end of the webinar too, you'll also be sent 2 documents, which I've got here. The one is this Project Last Mile case study, which goes into a bit more depth about the whole pilot. And then also this beginner's guide to co-creating behavior change communications for public health, which will go through a lot of the things that I'm talking about today and which my agency developed. So let's talk a little bit about the intervention. So the intervention was designed to boost youth engagement in health services, particularly for young men aged 18 to 13 who had lower vaccine uptake and overall engagement with health services during the pandemic. So we realized that just sharing information about what the services would be wouldn't be enough, and we needed to connect with them on a more personal and meaningful level. And that's where co-creation came into play. So we held a series of co-creation workshops, collaborating with youth organizations, role models, and other target audiences. And this experience wasn't just about collecting opinions, it was about shaping the entire campaign together. So we had 3 workshops over a period of weeks, all focused on different things. The first workshop had a different group of youth in it to the second and third workshop. So this was from workshop 1. And in this first workshop, we focused on listening. So we started by understanding the lived experiences of the young people in communities. We didn't assume we knew their motivations or barriers. We asked them, what did they think about health services? What would encourage them to visit a clinic? What would make them get a vaccination? And we used exercises like storytelling and image association to get to the heart of how they viewed health and wellness themselves. So here in these graphics, this was part of an exercise that we did with them where we asked the youth to select images from a collection of about 300 photos. I use these photos for many workshops, so they're very varied. And we asked them to pick a photo that represented their thoughts on seeking healthcare services. Most of them chose to select more than one photo, which was fine. And then they would bring the photos and they'd stick them up on the door in this case, and tell us a little bit about why they chose that picture and what it meant to them. And this is a really good way to uncover deeper thoughts and feelings about a topic without asking directly. A lot of times people don't even realize the information that they're giving you while they do this. And so then in a different exercise, so now we're starting to talk more about testing. We asked participants to vote using orange dots to indicate which aspects of the campaign messaging resonated with them most. So what we'd done is we'd found a bunch of campaigns that were aimed at youth. You'll see, I mean, there's one from McDonald's. Well, it's not from McDonald's, it's kind of ripping off McDonald's. But it was a whole range of different campaigns that we had. And in this particular instance, we asked them to look at the messaging. And so where they've put the dots is closest to the messaging that resonated with them most. So it wasn't just about like the poster that they liked the most, but it was the actual phrasing that got to them the most. And by doing this, it creates a bit of a heat map around the content that's resonating most. We also don't encourage them to speak to each other during this process. So they get given the dots and then we ask them to go up, and it's called working together alone. And they put the dots on in silence without sort of having a debate about why they're doing it or what it means to them. We later do ask them, we'll unpack things. So we'll look and we'll say, oh, we see there were quite a lot of dots around no one is happy all the time on the lower right-hand example. And then we'll ask them what it was about that resonated with them. And then what we got from this particular one, if anyone's interested in just some of the kind of insights that you can get from this kind of testing, is we got the fact that they liked short copy. They said they don't read, so they don't want to see a lot of text. They wanted things that has humor that grabs their attention, but the humor mustn't be condescending. And they also liked it when the messaging addressed actions and community responsibility. We did a similar exercise that I'm not going to show you with visual elements. So we split the testing up into messaging elements and visual elements. Then over here, what you're seeing is we took the images that we'd done of the visuals and of the messaging, and we put them on a XY axis, and we asked them to help us rate them in terms of what they felt was most effective in terms of messaging and visuals, to kind of understand how they ranked the things. And so not just to be like, oh, they like this, but to actually understand which one they like more or which one resonated more with them. Then another exercise involved having them use their own words, slogans, and messaging to get an understanding of the kind of words that they would like to use for this kind of campaign. So once again, we used the, we call it note and vote, where they work to get together alone. We gave them a prompt. They each take their Post-it notes and they sit there silently writing down things for a minute or two. And after they've written them down, we ask them to just put them on the wall without saying anything or without explaining. And then we ask them to group them together into these different groups. And then once we sort of had them, they all put on the words that stood out for all of them. So once again, you can see the voting dots. And this gives us an idea of what's resonating most with the group versus what was resonating with them as individuals. And then during this first workshop, we also kept a board of phrases that weren't written anywhere else. So these are things that people said while they were speaking that fitted into one of these categories. Because the idea for this first workshop was to understand what people felt, thought, and did based on this pilot that we were doing. So you'll see we have just things like random words that came up that just stood out to us during the workshop, and then I'd go and write them down. My handwriting is pretty awful. So if you can't read all of them, it's because, yeah, I should have been a doctor with my handwriting. So then based on all of the feedback, we identified 3 different design directions that we could pursue, as well as different messaging options that we could pursue. We met with the stakeholders, so the leads at Project Last Mile, the Department of Health, and USAID, and shared our findings with them. And from there, we developed some campaign messaging and visuals to test which resonated best in the second workshop. So in the second workshop, we introduced campaign concepts, including potential slogans and visuals. This was a different group of youth. They hadn't been involved in the first session. So what we did is we literally laid out all of the posters and concepts, as you can see on the tables here. And we just said to them, here's some dots. We want you to go and put dots on the things that resonate with you, whether it's messaging or design or whatever it is, just go put them on. So they went to do that. And the goal with this was we didn't want to present our ideas, but we wanted to actively test these concepts with the youth. So by getting them to vote, we're getting feedback on them rather than influencing them with what we think, they're just giving us raw feedback in the first go. So they selected the elements they liked most on each poster, and then we did a similar XY axis where we sort of put those elements. These were visual elements that we were looking at here, and these were messaging elements. You can see once again, we split it up so that the visual elements aren't affecting the messaging and vice versa. And then from the workshop, we found that this nostalgic ones, these are these 3 pictures here, was the color palette that was resonating most. And they preferred high impact images like this one with the face on it. And that they wanted artwork that showcased a variety of different activities, not just sports. And we also discovered that what they really liked in terms of the messaging was, will you show up for your community? So then when we presented all of these findings to the stakeholders, the feedback that came back was mostly around this community messaging. Will you show up for your community? If you've ever worked in development people use the word community all the time. And they felt like, no, the youth doesn't really resonate with this idea of community. We think it's irrelevant. We think it must have been something that you've kind of like pushed into the messaging. Like, could we test it further? So of course, we tested it. And so the workshop 3, I'm not going to cover everything that we did. We did some like very typical A/B testing where we had this color variation versus that color variation, this text versus that text on 2 things that were very similar with them. But specifically to test the communication element, what we did is we didn't want to influence them. So we did a repeat of the image association exercise. Now remember, this is a separate group to the one that we started off with. So they hadn't done this before. This was new for them. We presented 300 images once again, after they've now looked at the A/B and testing for their campaign. So they have some idea about the campaign. And we said to them, could they select the image that they feel best represents the campaign materials that we shared with them? And so I only shared one. So there were, 11 people in this workshop, and these are the images that they chose. And once we'd done that, we then asked them to write down on Post-its, working alone together again, the words that they felt best described these images. So based on that, we got this list. And we then asked them to come up again with their little stickers and vote on the words that resonate most with them. And so you can once again see the groupings. Don't worry about the colors. It's just that sometimes people got different colored stickers in their packs. And from that, we were able to see that the words like brotherhood, togetherness, unity, and community were coming out the most. We had a bit of a conversation with them, and they decided during the conversation that unity and togetherness were actually the same kind of definition for them. So we combined that into the next exercise. So in the next exercise, once we had the 3 categories, we asked them to go and select an image for each that they thought represented the words, and then give the 1 sentence about it like they had before. You'll see I noted down some of the phrases that kind of came up when they were doing that. And then once we'd done that, we then quickly mocked up on site these graphics where we put in the words that were coming out. So tribe, brothers, community, each other, friends, family. And we asked them to vote on it again, because we couldn't let them put stickers on the TV screen. We put them on the stand next door. And you'll see very clearly there that community was voted for as the highest again by this group. And they had a few little comments that they also made about it, about how they felt community was inclusive, whereas they felt terms like each other were exclusive, and that it was the reason why they actually would want to do a health campaign or get tested for health. So from this, we were able to establish that community was a word that resonated with the audience. And it helped us fine-tune not only what was being said, but also how it was being said, the language, the look, the language and the look evolved a lot more to be more direct, more personal, more empowering, and to connect better with the youth. So the messaging and visuals were then packaged into a toolkit, and youth mentors worked with the youth for 6 weeks to educate them about their health and encourage them to attend a wellness event where a range of health services were available. So you can see here in these photos, these are some of the ways that we used the visuals and the imaging. This is some of the activities that were being done on the wellness day. And the wellness days and the whole activation had a really good outcome. So the pilot reached over 779 young people. This was notable because it surpassed the combined membership of the 6 youth organizations that we were reaching out to. And then the wellness days, over 1,333 services were delivered at these wellness days. And what was very notable was that there was a 5% increase in trust in healthcare providers and a 20% increase in trust in the youth role models. These results are in the case study that will be shared with, so you can get a deeper look into them there. But for me personally, the most satisfying moment was when young people came to pick up their packs. So after they'd got 3 health checks done, they had a little card that they'd come and check in with us, and we'd give them a pack with some food and fruit and a few little items just to kind of reward them for the day. And the number of people who would come, I was working at the counter where they were picking up their packs. The number of people who would come and they'd tap the picture on their t-shirt or on their tote bag pictured here, and they'd say to me, "This is me." And one kid even asked if we had used his face for the graphic. And it felt incredibly rewarding to create something that the audience connected with personally in such a way. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't spent the time making sure that every decision, from the slogan to the imagery to the tone, was made collaboratively. So by building trust, refining our ideas through collaboration, and listening to the feedback at each stage, we created something that was effective because we didn't make assumptions about what we thought would resonate. So now you've seen what co-creation can do. Let's dive into the practical side of how co-creation works. So step one would be select the right team. And this starts with you. So this goes back to that whole thing I was saying at the beginning around assumptions and perspectives. So whether you're crafting a tweet, an Instagram caption, or an ad campaign, it's crucial to be conscious of your own assumptions, consider your own background and perspective, and how that might cause you to overlook something. So co-creation or any testing can take the form of involving an audience, external stakeholders, or it can be done in-house by simply ensuring a diverse group of team members work on a project. I tend to go for a hybrid approach where I carefully consider the team members and what they bring to the table alongside myself. So for the youth pilot, I made sure that my weaknesses were balanced out by my team. Okay, so for instance, I'm a woman, I'm 42 years old, I'm South African, I'm married with 2 dogs, I run marathons, I'm white, I come from a middle-class background, I have a nephew with Down syndrome. My husband is from a similar background as the youth we were working with, and he was diagnosed with cancer in our first year of marriage, but has been in remission for 10 years now before anyone's too worried. And even with all these experiences, I know that I don't know everything. I don't know what it's like to be a non-white person living in South Africa or other parts of Africa. I don't know what it's like to be a mother or physically disabled, or what it's like to be a teenager navigating complex health decisions. So because I'm able to recognize those things that I don't know, it means I can select a team that can fill in those gaps. So for the youth pilot, I brought in a Black woman as the copywriter. There was a colored person who helped out as the coordinator. And I sense checked with my husband, who, as I said, is from a similar background as the youth we were targeting. So if we did something, I could say, does this make sense to you? Does this make sense based on your background? Instead of just assuming that the messaging and the visuals that we were creating were going to resonate. So the second step is to understand the audience. So you can't design effective messaging without first understanding the people you're communicating with. And you would have seen that in workshop 1, a lot of that was actually around understanding the people that we were communicating with. So we wanted to know what their lived experiences were, rather than assuming that we knew what it was like to be a young person in an underserved area seeking help. And the workshops that we did helped us to move beyond just statistics. You can go and you can research these things and you can read about them online. But when you get into a real conversation, and at the end of the workshop, once we've built up trust, we spend about half an hour just sitting there asking them to share an experience of a time when they went to get healthcare and it was positive or negative. And they become quite vulnerable at that point because we've built up that relationship. And then you actually get a lot of insights and things coming through. And that really helps you understand the audience. So you're no longer just designing for a number, but you're able to know what they value and create something that they will value. Then step 3 is co-creating the messaging. So in our case, we didn't tell them what they needed to think. We asked them. And so we ended up developing quite a retro brand. There was actually a moment when they chose the retro kind of look where myself and the designer said to them, but why do you like this? And they said, no, because it reminds us of our childhood. And later when they left, it's my brother who I work with as the designer, we turned to each other and we said, but that was our childhood. That's not their childhood. But for some reason, the youth believed that things like Walkman and all of these things were part of their childhood. So that was just like a really fascinating insight and moment that we had. Then the next one is to test concepts and iterate. So this is where message testing and what we've been talking about today becomes critical. So we didn't just take the first batch of ideas and run with them. We tested them. We tested visuals. We tested messaging. We ran A and B tests. We adjusted it based on feedback. We took it back to them and said, is this what you want? And this process helped us refine not only the content, but also the tone and imagery we used. So they spoke a lot about different things. So this graphic, unfortunately, it's a little bit blurry, but this particular image here with this man sitting here on his haunches, this created a huge amount of discussion in workshop 2 and workshop 3. And there was a lot of discussion about but this is what we like in our communities. We should definitely use it. And then the other half of the group saying, no, but this is a negative connotation and we don't want to use it. So having those discussions, testing, reiterating, trying it out in different ways, bringing it to different groups, it really helps you to understand whether or not it's something that will resonate, rather than making an assumption about whether it will resonate. In the end, we actually didn't use it, but most of the group actually wanted us to use it. So you do make a call, and that's the next step, which is incorporating feedback loops. So we had quite a clear idea of what worked from the youth, but also we were creating a public health campaign. So once we were throughout the process, we needed to incorporate feedback from the other stakeholders, public health experts, to make sure that the messaging was still accurate and aligned with health guidelines. And these feedback loops were crucial because while engaging with the youth on one side, we also had to ensure that the message didn't deviate from public health facts and best practices. And even though this example is around public health and nonprofit space, I think we all know, if you work in the private sector anyway, there are always so many diverse stakeholders that are coming in. So it might not be a public health expert that you need to bring in, but there's always going to be somebody else that you need to keep getting their feedback on to make sure that you're on the right track. Okay, so you might be thinking, this sounds great for big campaigns, but what about smaller communication materials like social media posts? So many of the mistakes I mentioned earlier, like the H&M hoodie ad and the Sterling Bank one, happened on social media. And social media is fast-paced and it's easy and quick to make quick assumptions. And the reality is we don't always have the luxury of time or resources for deep co-creation, especially with smaller content. So you can't conduct a workshop for every little social media post that you want to put out. But it doesn't mean that we can't apply the same principles that I've been speaking about in co-creation to create content. So when co-creation isn't possible, make sure to check your content and try to consider it from different perspectives. If you're not sure about a social media post, don't just be like, oh, I'm going to post it. Like, try and find at least somebody else with a different point of view. So think about yourself. That whole exercise that I said earlier about me being a white 42-year-old woman, if it was me, I'd then be thinking, like, can I find a black male who's 18 and show it to them and get their take on it? So try and think of somebody who's very different to you and has a very different background from you to share the stuff with if you do have a hesitation. If you work with a diverse team and you're moving quickly, then that's great to help catch potential issues. So the one thing I wanted to share today is that if you don't have anyone else around, you can also ask AI to evaluate your content. So I'm going to give you an example. So this is a prompt that I wrote, and it is in the presentation deck, so you can copy and paste it if you ever want to. And this was something that I asked ChatGPT to evaluate the Palestine International Airways ad. So I put the ad in and I said, use this prompt and evaluate that ad. So do you want to know what ChatGPT suggested? So they gave me a whole long page of things. And eventually I asked it to redraw the ad for me. So this is very much a ChatGPT drawing. But it basically said that the visual composition could be problematic in the left-hand side one. The use of the red splatters unintentionally resembles blood stains. The wording and visual elements might not translate well globally. The airline industry and French audience may interpret it differently than the intended excitement of route resumption. And they said to consider these refinements: rephrasing the message, modifying the visual composition, adjusting the plane's position so it doesn't appear to be flying toward the Eiffel Tower, but away from it, and put it at a softer trajectory or angled flight path, to change the background colors and textures to avoid intended violent or ominous connotations. And I think what they came out with isn't that bad. I mean, it needs some work and a designer, but compared to what the first one was, it's quite an improvement. So I just wanted to show you that because I know sometimes you are under-resourced and you don't know how to do these things or how to check them. And if you can't find somebody else to check them, yeah, maybe try running it through ChatGPT, and then at least you've got a starting point of where the issues could be before you put the ad out. So in closing, co-creation is a powerful tool, but the real value lies in the principles behind it. So being aware of your assumptions, gathering diverse feedback, and continuously refining your message. So these principles can be applied to everything you create, whether it's a large campaign or a quick social media post. Even if you're in a fast-paced environment, you can still apply these core ideas of co-creation. You can still ask questions and gather feedback, even if you're not running full-scale workshops. Testing doesn't need to be formal. It can be as simple as checking in with a colleague who brings a fresh perspective. And so just a few questions for you before you hit send or post that you can ask yourself is the language inclusive? Does this respect everyone in your audience, regardless of background? Does this resonate across cultural contexts? I think the Nigerian example was a good one of where it didn't necessarily resonate across cultural contexts. And could this be a joke or image that's misinterpreted? And then is the imagery appropriate? So a picture speaks volumes, and sometimes these volumes can carry unintended messages. So the Pakistani ad on its own, without the picture, might have been fine. Paris, we're coming today. If that was just text in a tweet and there'd been no image with it, people might have just have been like, okay, fine, we get it. But accompanied with the picture, all of a sudden it created an unintended message. So always think about how the two things, imagery and messaging, is working together. So in short, testing and refining your content, it doesn't have to be time consuming. And by applying these co-creation principles, being aware of your assumptions, gathering diverse feedback, and continuously refining your message, you can create content that's more effective, inclusive, and relevant to your audience. So assumptions are powerful, and they can be both helpful and the mother of all mess-ups. But by testing and co-creating with your audience, you remove the guesswork, broaden your perspective, and ensure that your messages land the way that they're supposed to. So thank you, and we can move to questions now.
Oh, wow.
Let me see.
Thank Wendy, that was really fantastic. And I have so many questions running through my mind. And Christine actually shares the one question with me. She wants to know how much time and cost did this testing add to the project that you presented to us today?
So yeah, that's an interesting question. But I think it obviously adds more time. Well, it kind of does. It depends how good the team that you're working with are in giving you feedback, I guess, at the client end. So sometimes having set points where you know you're having a workshop can maybe make it easier. But so yeah, we had these workshops, I think 3 weeks apart. It was a very time-bound campaign. Camilla can confirm. I think we had something like 3 or 4 months from getting briefed on it to the campaign rollout and execution and everything. So it was a very rapid campaign, and we still managed to fit in all of these elements. Cost-wise, it does add probably a bit more cost, but I also think it depends. If you're in a private company and you're already working with an agency in some way, a lot of them do focus groups anyway at different points. And in a way, this co-creation with an audience, it is like a focus group. But instead of pulling in a random focus group and kind of saying like, do you like what we're doing? You're pulling them in and you're saying like, help us create this with us, come on the journey with us. So I don't think it necessarily has to make it a lot more expensive than it would be if you were doing it another way. Yeah, in my experience, it probably levels out at the end of the day, because as I actually feel like you get less reverts. And also what happened is when you go back to the stakeholder group, we had a lot of reasons to back up why we'd done something. So often when you meet with a stakeholder group, the stakeholder group will go, I'm not sure about that color, or I don't like that word. And so then you often end up having to make lots of different versions of things to see whether they like it. Whereas in this way, we could quickly say, okay, I know you don't like that color, but the reason why we're doing it is because in workshop 1 and 2, this was the feedback that we had. This is what it does. And so you're actually able to give a lot of factual reasons about your choices, which I think is often missed otherwise. So I think, as I say, in some ways I feel like it speeds things up, and in other ways it can also feel like it slows things down.
Yeah, I agree, because my next question was going to be, when do you stop testing? When do you stop going back and asking again and again and again? Because now you're actually just not getting to the actual job.
So I think like we set out right at the beginning to have 3 workshops, and that's the way I normally do it. You'll see in the co-creation document that I'll share later, it's a guideline of 3 workshops. And I think beyond that, by the time you get to the 3rd workshop, the things you're testing really are or should be minor. So they shouldn't be huge things. If you have something huge coming up at that stage, you probably need to go back to the drawing board because there's something that you've missed. So I think even within that, you're kind of putting limits on how many tests you're going to do right at the beginning. Because with anything, I mean, all of you have written a document that turns out to be version 54 because somebody keeps tweaking and changing words. And I think here you're setting that time limit. You're saying there are 3 workshops. Workshop 1, we're finding out who our audience is, what they want, what motivates them. Workshop 2, we're testing out that creative and seeing whether it resonates in the way that we thought it would based on workshop 1. And workshop 3, we're coming back and we're saying, we listened to you in workshop 2. These are the small changes and things that we heard. We just want you to confirm whether or not we've got it right. So that 3rd workshop, we tested quite a lot around community in that 3rd workshop, but all it did actually was confirm that the direction we were going was actually correct. If it hadn't been correct, maybe it would have then resulted in a bit of a change in direction. But even there, most of the campaign at that point wouldn't have been affected. So I think putting those boundaries around the workshops really helps because it's not an infinite number of testing that you'll be doing.
I see Marisha has asked if it's necessary to redo the audience research every time you launch a campaign on the same topic.
No, so I don't think it would be, because I mean, you are getting rich insights from them. So if I was to do another youth campaign, I would go back and look at those insights. But I think, do you know what is really helpful with that first workshop? I actually think sometimes when I work with people, they want to skip that first workshop because they go, oh, we can save time and money if we skip that first workshop. But the first workshop actually helps you to get really good insights on your specific problem. Because even if you're doing another campaign with youth and accessing health, people change a little bit, how they approach things change a little bit. And so you can kind of take some of the findings you had from before, maybe you'll take the campaigns that you had before and put them on the wall that first time and ask them to vote for the messaging, and you're learning things. So it's not 100% necessary, but I would say you're missing out on a lot if you skip that first workshop. I think my thing is always, you've got to know who you're communicating to before you decide how you're communicating to them. And so by missing that first workshop, you aren't going to understand your who that well. And so your how is going to be a little bit tougher to get right. And I think you probably will end up with more test iterations than if you just start with understanding the who.
Fantastic. Wendy, Eleanor is asking, how do you select your audience? In other words, do you use a database of the client or random?
Okay, so that's a great question.
Eleanor, sorry, if I can just clarify, I assume that's the audience for the focus group. Let's just see if Eleanor
Sorry,
says something.
yes,
Eleanor,
thank
you
you.
can. Okay.
Okay, so that's a great question. And we actually selected the audience 2 different ways. So that's probably also going to be helpful for all of you to understand that there are different ways of doing it. So the first group of audience we selected differently in that the first workshops, I'm from Quebec, Port Elizabeth. I saw there was someone from Uitenhage who joined the call. And this project pilot was being run in Khayelitsha in the Western Cape. But the idea was that it could become national anyway. So we actually ran the first workshop in Quebec. So we knew we couldn't get people from Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain to that workshop. That wasn't feasible. But we still have underserved communities with similar LSMs and that kind of thing living in PE. So what we did with that was literally our production coordinator for it, she reached out to people that she knew that were in those kind of LSMs and invited them to come along. We did pay them. They were paid for their participation in the workshop. I find that paying people makes them feel like they have to work, so they contribute more than if you just ask them to volunteer. So we didn't pay them a lot. We gave them food. I mean, these were like 18. We didn't take anyone under 18 because of just like restrictions around children and that kind of thing. So these were 18 to 23, 24-year-olds, I think, in that first group. And so they were all very happy to get fed and to get a couple of $100 and their taxi fares paid to come for the day. They were like, we're winning. And so that first lot, was just like basically friends and family. that we asked. And then the second time, because the pilot was working with youth organizations in Mitchell's Plain and Kailicha, we asked those youth organizations to supply participants for the workshops. So it very much, because obviously we wanted it to resonate with those specific youth organizations. So I think it does just depend on what your campaign is and who you want to reach. Either friends and family, put a notice on social media. I've seen that worked before too, where you're like, we're looking for people to participate. But as I think the key is actually paying them for their time. So the youth organizations, they had a bit of a different agreement because the mentors were getting a stipend for the work that they were going to do over the 6 weeks and that kind of thing. So even though we weren't paying them for the workshop, it was part of their agreement to be a mentor in the program for that period. So yeah, I'd say don't just invite volunteers, like rather involve them in a way that makes them feel like this is a job, and then they participate more meaningfully.
I'm wondering, I'm just going through the participants, if there's anybody who wants to put up their hand using the react button. If you have a question specifically to still ask Wendy. Not seeing anything. Okie dokes. I think we've all got so much to think about, Wendy. You've got us silent. So in that case, hang on, there's a hand up. Zama, you can unmute yourself and then ask your question, please.
Good afternoon, colleagues. And it's not a question, but can I request Wendy to kindly share her details, contact details specifically, and also will it be possible for us to have access to the recordings? Thank you so much, colleagues.
Okay, the recording definitely. Natalie, who manages our IABC Secretariat, will share the recording with everybody who has registered for the event today. And then, Wendy, you can either pop your details into the chat box, or we'll get you Zama's information and you can contact him directly.
Great, I'll put my contact details in. They're also on the end of the presentation, so they should be there when that goes out as well.
Okay, and we will be sharing that.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yes. Okay. Well, in that case, I'm now going to hand over to our incoming chairperson, Yemi. I neglected to say at the start of this webinar that Yemi was awarded his PhD at the end of last year. So, Dr. Adeyemu, thank you for closing this webinar for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Teresa. I mean, it's been a fantastic 1 hour, and really, I think a few key things stand out for me, and I took quite a lot of notes. I think Wendy is very clear that audience perception is unpredictable. So as communications professionals, we really need to make sure that we stay on that, we're aware of it, know ourselves, know the audience, and then, of course, make sure that we incorporate testing into our processes. Then, of course, testing isn't a delay or an additional cost. Just like you said, if we make it something that happens throughout the development stage, then of course we will get value. And simple tweaks can make a huge difference. I saw that with the Pakistan airline advert, which you retweet using AI, and the simple, just that simple process and the huge difference it made is very important. And of course, sometimes AI can be used, is necessary, especially where you feel that, you need to have a second opinion where you don't have people. So my fellow communicators, I think the message is clear. Before you tell, please test. No matter how well crafted we think our messages are, assumptions can lead to misalignment. We've seen that in the Nigerian case, and the companies had to come back and apologize to people. And, it just kind of erodes the confidence they have in your brand if you have to keep coming back to apologize for communication materials that you've put out. So we've also seen that with the Pepsi and the other examples. So if we have to build trust, engagement, and lasting impact, we must embrace testing as an integral part of our strategy. Whether we work in corporate, government, or non-profit sectors, please, let's apply the principles. And those questions Wendy shared with us at the end of the presentation, very important. We need to check so that we are sure of the sensitivities around what we are developing and sharing. So once again, a huge thank you to Wendy for this excellent session. And of course, Teresa, our moderator, Natalie behind the scenes, making things happen, the IABC board for signing off on this, and of course, our audience for joining. You're very, very important to this process. If you are not online, then this won't happen. Let's all keep testing. Let's keep refining our communication materials. And please stay engaged with IABC for more enriching sessions. Let's continue raising the bar for communication excellence. Thank you, and have a great day.